All right, you sick fucks. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dive into a real clusterfuck, the Syrian civil war. It's like, imagine your family's worst Thanksgiving dinner, but with like RPGs and a little sprinkle of chemical weapons.
Yeah.
That's Syria for you.
Yeah.
More players than a goddamn orgy, and everyone's fighting over a piece of that desert shithole. But hey, we ain't picking sides. We're just here to untangle this whole mess.
Right.
Figure out who's screwing who and why the hell any of this should matter to you.
Yeah. It's a real geopolitical gangbang. We got the Syrian government and their buddies, then a whole bunch of rebels who can't decide if they want to kiss or kill each other, Al-Qaeda offshoots running around like it's the goddamn apocalypse, and the Kurds trying to carve out their own little slice of paradise in the middle of it all.
So basically a total shit show. Let's cut the crap and start with the main man himself. Bashar al-Assad and his crew, the Syrian Arab Republic. Sources say these guys were running out of manpower back in like 2015, relying on a bunch of weekend warriors and ragtag militias to back up their actual army. Is that bullshit, or were they really that desperate?
Not bullshit, but it's not the whole story.
Okay.
Around late 2015, early 2016, the Syrian armed forces were spread thin. Desertions, casualties, the whole 9 yards. They needed those irregular forces just to hold the line. But things have changed since then.
So they managed to pull their shit together.
In a way, yeah. Thanks to their sugar daddies, Russia and Iran, the Syrian military's been hitting the gym and getting a makeover. New equipment, fresh recruits even brought some of those militias back under their control.
Hold up, Russia and Iran. What the hell are those guys doing messing around in Syria's sandbox? I'm guessing they ain't there out of the goodness of their hearts, right?
You catch on quick, we'll get to their motives later. But let's stick with the militias for now. You found those lionesses of national defense at the checkpoints pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, those chicks running around with AKs sound like a Tarantino movie waiting to happen.
Right.
Are they just a bunch of soccer moms with guns, or are we talking about some serious female firepower here?
Don't underestimate the lionesses. They're 500-strong part of the larger national defense forces. About 50,000 troops, most of them Alawites, Assad's sect.
Right.
These women are trained and armed. They ain't messing around.
So they're not just checking IDs and handing out speeding tickets.
Nope. And they're not the only ones. Christian militias are also fighting alongside the government, mainly to protect their communities from those ISIS psychos.
Speaking of psychos, what about Hezbollah? Their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, basically said if Syria falls, the whole region goes to hell. Are they just there for the religious reasons, or is there something else going on?
Religion's definitely a factor. Protecting Shia shrines is a big deal for them. But it goes deeper than that. Hezbollah's in bed with the Assad regime. They see him as a shield against their enemies. Israel is the U.S. Sunni extremists.
Right.
They need Assad to stay in power, no matter the cost.
So basically a strategic fuckfest.
Pretty much.
And speaking of strategic, what about Iran throwing $15 billion at Syria? That's a lot of cash for a country that's basically a war zone. What's their angle?
It's all about regional power playing, dude. Think of the Middle East as a giant game of Risk. Iran wants to be the goddamn emperor, and that means expanding their influence, kicking the asses of their rivals like Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Syria, under Assad, is their pawn in that game.
So they're playing 4D chess while the rest of us are stuck with checkers.
You got it. And they've got a skilled player on their side, the late Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was basically Assad's best friend and military coach.
Right.
He was pulling strings, training militias, making sure Iran's investment paid off. In blood.
You mentioned militias. What's the deal with those Afghan and Pakistani fighters? Didn't Iran basically trick a bunch of them into fighting for Assad?
They did. Iran tapped into its Shia diaspora, guys who fled Afghanistan and Pakistan hoping for a better life only to get sucked into this mess. At their peak, there were like 10,000 to 18,000 Afghans and a couple thousand Pakistanis fighting in Syria. Talk about a bad career move.
Damn, were they all gung-ho ready to die for Assad?
Fuck no. Many were refugees, desperate, poor as shit. Some were coerced, others bribed with promises of cash or citizenship, the golden ticket out of their shithole.
Jeez.
But the really fucked up part, they were often thrown into the worst battles, barely trained, basically cannon fodder.
Jesus, that's some dark shit, man. Exploiting vulnerable people to fight your war, classic move.
It's the ugly underbelly of this whole conflict. Using the powerless for their own gain. Nothing new there, right?
All right, so we got Assad and his crew backed by religious fanatics, Iranian puppet masters, and a whole lot of desperate dudes with guns. But what about the other side? The rebels, the opposition. Who the hell are these guys and what do they want?
That's where things get even more fucked up. You got a whole spectrum of opposition groups, from wannabe Democrats to hardcore jihadists. Their goals are as diverse as their facial hair.
All right, let's break it down. Starting with the Free Syrian Army, the FSA. These guys literally announced their formation on YouTube. That's either genius or just plain stupid.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
It's true. Back in 2011, a bunch of Syrian army officers who'd had enough of Assad's bullshit went on YouTube and declared the FSA. It was chaos back then.
Right.
The uprising was gaining steam. They needed a united front.
So these rogue soldiers decided to start their own revolution, and they used YouTube as their recruitment tool.
It was ballsy, but it also shows the problems they had from the start.
Yeah.
Trying to organize a real fighting force from a bunch of pissed-off defectors is like herding cats. They struggled with leadership in fighting shifting alliances. Plus, the foreign aid they got, while helpful, also created some serious drama within their ranks.
Foreign aid. Who's backing these guys?
The FSA was seen as the moderate rebels by the West. The good guys. At least in their eyes. So the U.S., Turkey, some Gulf states threw weapons training and cash at them.
Moderate. That's a funny term when you're talking about a war where everyone's shooting at each other.
Yeah, it's relative, for sure. But in the fucked up world of Syrian politics, moderate meant they were at least somewhat on the same page as the West. Enough to get them some shiny new toys to play war with.
Hold on. You're telling me that some of these moderate FSA guys trained by the U.S. and Turkey ended up joining ISIS?
Yep.
That's some serious bullshit.
It happened. Around 2014, as ISIS was gaining power, some FSA fighters jumped ship.
Wow.
Maybe they liked the ideology. Maybe they saw ISIS as the winning team, or maybe they just loved the chaos. It's a reminder that in war, loyalty's a fickle bitch.
Yeah.
Today's friend can be tomorrow's enemy, and vice versa.
Talk about blurring the lines. This whole thing's making my head spin.
Right.
So we got the FSA fighting Assad, sometimes cooperating with Al-Qaeda and occasionally joining ISIS. What the fuck is going on here?
We're just getting started, my friend.
Oh, God.
We've got more factions to explore.
Jesus.
Next up, the Syrian National Army, or the SNA. They're tight with Turkey. But are they even on the same page as the FSA?
Man, I need a flow chart and a stiff drink to keep track of all these groups.
I hear ya.
Yeah.
The SNA is a relatively new kid on the block, formed in late 2017 by merging a bunch of rebel groups under the Syrian interim government. And of course, Turkey had their hand in the cookie jar the whole time.
So Turkey's basically playing puppet master with these guys.
They definitely have a lot of influence. The SNA's main goals are to set up a safe zone in Syria, preferably near the Turkish border, where they can do their thing without interference. And they hate the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, the Kurdish-led group controlling a big chunk of northeastern Syria.
Oh, Kurds. Didn't even know they were major players in this shit show. We'll definitely have to get into that later.
Yeah.
But there's another group I'm curious about. The National Coordination Committee for Democratic Change, the NCC.
Right.
They're supposed to be opposition, but some say they're just Assad puppets. What's the deal with them?
The NCC is a weird one. They're like the let's talk it out guys in a room full of people throwing Molotov cocktails.
Right.
They want dialogue, political reforms, a peaceful transition of power.
Yeah.
They don't want to kick Assad out immediately, which makes him suspect as hell to other opposition groups.
So they're the hippies of the Syrian rebellion. No wonder nobody trusts them.
Pretty much. They haven't made much progress, and nobody really believes they're genuine.
All right, so we got the FSA, the SNA, and the NCC. All different flavors of opposition, each with their own baggage and weird-ass alliances. But we can't forget about Al-Qaeda. How the hell did those assholes get involved in the Syrian civil war?
Al-Qaeda in Syria is a story of evolution and opportunity. Their main branch early on was the Al-Nusra Front. These guys were responsible for some seriously fucked up shit, including over 50 suicide bombings.
Holy shit, 50 suicide bombings.
Yeah.
Were they just blowing shit up randomly, or was there some kind of strategy behind that madness?
They had a plan, all right. They were targeting both government forces and civilians, trying to create chaos and make the regime look weak as fuck.
Right.
Both Syria and the U.S. labeled them terrorists.
So everybody agreed these guys were the bad guys.
Pretty much. But here's where it gets interesting. The Al-Nusra Front sometimes fought alongside the FSA, even though they hated each other's ideologies.
No way.
Yeah.
How could they cooperate when one wants democracy and the other wants to turn Syria into a Sharia law and theme park?
Sometimes you gotta team up with the devil to fight a bigger demon.
Yeah.
Both the FSA and Al-Nusra wanted Assad gone, and that created some strange bedfellows. But it never lasted. Al-Nusra's extremism and their insistence on imposing Sharia law pissed off most Syrians. even those in the FSA.
So even among the rebels, there was backstabbing and infighting. This whole thing's a clusterfuck of epic proportions.
Yeah.
But before we completely lose our minds, there's one more group we need to talk about. The Kurds. You mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
The SDF.
Yep, the Syrian Democratic Forces. They're the Kurdish-led group that's become a major pain in the ass for everyone involved.
Right.
Their story is one of resilience, autonomy, and a whole lot of ass-kicking.
Okay, break it down for me. Who are these guys, and what the hell do they want?
The Kurds have been treated like shit in Syria for a long time, denied basic rights and recognition. But when the uprisings started in 2011, Assad, in a desperate attempt to win them over, gave citizenship to a bunch of stateless Kurds.
So Assad was trying to buy their loyalty. Did it work?
Not really. The Kurds, mostly represented by the SDF, saw this as a chance to finally get a piece of the pie.
Right.
They're not necessarily looking to break away from Syria entirely, but they want a decentralized system where they can run their own shit. And they've been pretty damn successful at it.
How successful are we talking? Are they just a small band of rebels, or are they a force to be reckoned with?
The SDF's no joke. They've got between 55,000 and 80,000 fighters. And get this, only about 40% of them are actually Kurdish.
Wait, so they recruiting non-Kurds too?
Yeah.
What's their secret? Are they offering free baklava or something?
It's not about the baklava. They're effective, and they've got a common enemy that unites everyone. ISIS. People from different backgrounds, ethnicities, religions.
Right.
They've all joined the SDF to kick ISIS's ass.
Makes sense. If you're facing those maniacs, you need all the help you can get.
Exactly. And they're not just fighting. The SDF has become a major force for stability in northeastern Syria. They've got their own administration courts, security forces. Basically, they're running their own little country within a country.
Damn a state within a state. This whole thing just keeps getting weirder.
That's the Syrian civil war in a nutshell. A giant clusterfuck of competing interests, shifting alliances, and brutal violence.
You can say that again. So we've covered Assad and his crew, the FSA, the NCC, Al-Qaeda, and the SDF. But there's one big player we haven't talked about yet, Israel. They're a regional superpower, but they've been strangely quiet in this whole mess. What's their deal? Are they just sitting back and watching the show?
Israel's playing it smart. Their main focus is keeping Iran in check. They've launched airstrikes on Iranian militias and weapon convoys, but they've avoided getting directly involved in the civil war.
So they're trying to keep Iran from getting too powerful without getting their hands dirty.
Exactly. But recent events have forced them to take a more active role in protecting their border. Rebels near the Golan Heights, which Israel controls, have been causing trouble. So Israel's setting up a new buffer zone to keep those assholes away.
Israel's basically saying, don't fuck with us or we'll fuck with you.
You got it. They're watching everything very closely, and they're not afraid to use force to protect their interests.
Man, this whole thing's like a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
So many players, so many different goals, and a whole lot of bad blood.
Right.
It's hard to imagine this ending peacefully.
You're right. It's a bleak outlook. But understanding who wants what and why they're fighting is the first step to figuring out this mess. We've got Assad's crew, backed by Russia and Iran, fighting a bunch of divided rebels with Al-Qaeda and ISIS causing mayhem, and the Kurds trying to build their own thing in the middle of all the chaos. And of course, we've got Israel lurking in the background, ready to jump in if things get too out of hand. It's a recipe for disaster.
It's definitely a shit show of epic proportions. But it's also a reminder that the world's a complex and dangerous place, and sometimes shit just explodes. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into the twisted motivations of these players and how the hell this whole mess affects you.
It's easy to get lost in this clusterfuck of names and alliances, but we're talking about real people here.
Right.
Each one of these groups is made up of individuals with their own reasons for fighting their own stories.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the human cost when you're looking at this shit show from a distance.
Right.
But you're right, there are real people getting caught in the crossfire, having their lives turned upside down.
Exactly, and their motivations are tangled as fuck. Take the Syrian government, for example. Why would anyone still be fighting for Assad after all the blood that's been spilled?
Yeah, I don't know. After everything we just talked about, I'm surprised anyone would still be on his side. I mean, the dude's basically a dictator who gasses his own people.
It's not that simple.
Okay.
For some, it's about survival. They see the government as fucked up as it is as the only thing standing between them and total chaos. If Assad falls, Syria could descend into anarchy. And that's a terrifying thought for a lot of people.
I get it. Nobody wants to live in a Mad Max wasteland. The Desert Hawks. Are these guys just in it for the thrill of the fight?
Sure, some might be adrenaline junkies, but a lot of them are driven by darker shit. Power, money, revenge. The war has created a breeding ground for all sorts of fucked up opportunism.
Right.
You got warlords, gangsters, criminals, all taking advantage of the chaos to line their pockets and settle old scores.
So it's like a real-life Grand Theft Auto, with more sand and fewer strippers.
Basically. When the rules go out the window, the worst kinds of people come crawling out of the woodwork.
And speaking of crawling out of the woodwork, we got to talk about ISIS.
Yeah.
These guys are a whole different level of fucked up. They're not just fighting for territory or power.
Right.
They're driven by this insane ideology that justifies pure evil.
You're right. ISIS is like a cancer, a death cult. They feed on hatred and violence.
Yeah.
Their ideology is a twisted mix of religious extremism, apocalyptic fantasies, and a deep need to control and punish anyone who doesn't conform.
It's fucking terrifying. Beheadings, mass executions, sexual slavery. It's like something out of a horror movie. What kind of person could support that?
It's hard to grasp, right? But their propaganda machine is incredibly effective at targeting vulnerable people. They prey on the lost, the disenfranchised, the angry, people who feel like they've got nothing to lose. They're looking for something to believe in, something to fight for.
So it's like a twisted cult, brainwashing people into becoming killing machines.
Exactly. And once they're in, it's almost impossible to get out. They use fear, intimidation, and violence to keep their followers in line.
It's a really messed up system.
It is.
All right. So we got Assad's crew, a bunch of power-hungry militias, and a death cult obsessed with world domination. What about the opposition groups like the FSA? Are they really fighting for democracy and freedom, or are they just another flavor of crazy?
The FSA is complicated.
Okay.
Some are genuine revolutionaries fighting for a better future for Syria.
Right.
They're the ones who took to the streets in 2011 demanding change, risking their lives for a chance at freedom.
So they're the true believers.
Yeah.
The ones who want to tear down the system and build something better in its place.
Exactly. But even within the FSA, there are divisions, disagreements about what a free Syria should look like. Some are more religiously conservative. Others are more secular. Some want a strong central government. Others want a more decentralized system. And these internal squabbles have weakened their fight against the regime.
So even the good guys can't seem to get their shit together.
It's the curse of the Syrian opposition.
Yeah.
Too many factions, too many agendas, not enough unity to effectively challenge Assad.
So it's not as simple as good guys versus bad guys. It's a giant clusterfuck of competing interests all tangled up in a web of violence and betrayal.
You got it. And that's what makes this conflict so difficult to understand, let alone resolve.
All right. So we've got a better understanding of the players on the ground. But what about the puppet masters behind the scenes? The U.S., Russia, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they're all meddling in Syria's business, Ryder. What the hell are they hoping to gain from this shit show?
You're right. This isn't just a Syrian civil war. It's become a proxy war, a playground for regional and global powers, each with their own agenda, their own interests.
So Syria's become the battleground for everyone else's war.
It is. And it's making a bad situation a million times worse. Let's start with the U.S. Their involvement has been a roller coaster of change in priorities and half-assed commitments.
Okay.
At first, they were hesitant to get directly involved, opting instead to provide weapons and training to those moderate rebels.
Right.
But as ISIS gained power, they ramped up their military presence, launching airstrikes and partnering with the SDF to fight the extremists.
So the U.S. was tiptoeing around the edges until ISIS came along and fucked up their plans?
Pretty much. They didn't want to get sucked into another messy Middle Eastern war, but they also couldn't ignore the threat ISIS posed, not just to the region, but to their own national security.
And what about Russia? They seem to be all in on Assad. Why are they so keen on propping up his regime?
Russia's got a few reasons for backing Assad.
Okay.
First, they see Syria as a strategic ally in the Middle East, a way to counter Western influence. Second, they've got a naval base in Tartus, their only Mediterranean outpost, and they're not about to give that up. And third, they see this as a chance to show off their military power and challenge the U.S. Basically, they're saying, hey, look at us, we can still fuck shit up.
So it's about geopolitics, military posturing, and sticking it to the Americans. Classic Russian moves.
You nailed it. Russia sees the Syrian civil war as a chance to flex their muscles. They're playing hardball, and they don't give a shit about the consequences.
And what about Iran? We talked about them throwing billions of dollars at Assad, but what else are they doing to make sure their investment pays off?
They've been busy.
Okay.
training and equipping pro-government militias, sending military advisors, and even deploying their own troops, including those elite Quds, force badasses. Their goals are similar to Russia's. They want to keep Assad in power, maintain a foothold in Syria, and fuck over their rivals, especially Saudi Arabia.
So Iran's using Syria as their personal playground
Pretty much.
to push their agenda in the region.
They're playing a long game, and they'll do whatever it takes to win.
Okay, so we've got the U.S., Russia, and Iran all tangled up in this mess, each with their own reasons for wanting a piece of the action. But what about Turkey? They're a NATO member, supposedly on the same team as the U.S., but they seem to be playing their own game.
Turkey is a tough nut to crack.
Right.
They've got a bunch of different goals in Syria, and sometimes those goals contradict each other.
Okay.
On one hand, they're worried about the shitstorm on their southern border. They don't want refugees flooding into their country. They don't want Kurdish separatism to spread. And they definitely don't want extremist groups setting up shop next door.
So they're trying to protect their own backyard and keep the chaos from spreading.
That's part of it. But they're also pursuing their own ambitions. They've been backing certain rebel groups, particularly the SNA, and they've launched military operations into northern Syria, setting up a buffer zone and targeting Kurdish forces.
Hold on, they're fighting the same groups the U.S. is supporting.
Yeah.
That's some seriously messed up alliance dynamics.
It is. But that's the reality of the Syrian civil war.
Yeah.
Even allies have their own agendas, and those agendas often clash. And when they do, it gets ugly.
So basically, it's every country for itself.
Yeah.
A free-for-all where the only rule is fuck the other guy.
You got it. And don't forget about Saudi Arabia.
Right.
They're not directly involved militarily, but they've been pumping money and weapons into certain rebel groups, especially the ones with an Islamist bent. They want to counter Iran's influence and support Sunni factions that align with their own ideology.
So it's a proxy war within a proxy war.
Yeah.
Sunni versus Shia, Saudi Arabia versus Iran, all playing out on Syrian soil.
It's a goddamn mess.
It is.
With global implications. The Syrian civil war has become a stage for regional and global power struggles, and the stakes are high.
And in the middle of all this, it's the Syrian people who are paying the price. Millions displaced, countless lives lost, a whole generation scarred by violence and loss. It's a tragedy.
It is, and the effects of this conflict are going to be felt for a long time. Syria is a broken country, and it's going to take a Herculean effort to put it back together.
All right. So we've got foreign powers meddling, regional rivalries playing out, and a whole lot of innocent people getting caught in the crossfire. This shit's getting pretty heavy.
It is.
But I want to circle back to something you said earlier. The impact of this war on the world stage.
Right.
Has this whole Syrian shit show changed the rules of the game in international politics?
It has. The Syrian civil war has exposed some uncomfortable truths, the weaknesses of international organizations, the fragility of alliances, and the return of something we haven't seen in a while: great power competition. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that the world is a dangerous place and the old playbook doesn't work anymore.
So basically the world's gone to hell and Syria's leading the way.
It's not that simple.
Yeah.
But the Syrian conflict has definitely shown us the ugly side of global politics. It's a reminder that power greed and ideology can drive countries to act in brutal and destructive ways.
And in this new world where the rules are constantly changing and nobody seems to know what the fuck is going on, what's the future of Syria,
Yeah.
can they ever recover from this, or are they doomed to endless conflict?
That's the question, isn't it? And the answer, well, it's not very clear.
Okay.
The Syrian civil war has become so entrenched, so entangled with the interests of powerful players that finding a way out seems almost impossible.
So are we talking about years or even decades more fighting? More cities turned to rubble, more people forced to flee their homes. Is that Syria's future?
It's a real possibility, and a terrifying one. The longer this conflict drags on, the harder it becomes to find a solution. The wounds run deep, and they can poison a society for generations.
But there has to be some hope, right? Some path towards a better future. What needs to happen for Syria to find peace?
It's a complicated puzzle, but a few things are essential. First, there needs to be a genuine commitment to dialogue, to negotiation,
Right.
to finding a political solution that addresses everyone's concerns.
So everyone needs to put their guns down, sit down, and actually talk to each other.
Exactly, but that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Dialogue requires compromise, a willingness to make concessions, to acknowledge that the other side might have a point. And that's really fucking hard in a conflict where everyone sees each other as the enemy.
So putting aside the hatred and finding common ground, that's a tough ask, especially in a place like Syria.
It is. But without dialogue, Without a willingness to find a political solution, the cycle of violence will just keep spinning, and the only winners will be the extremists, the ones who thrive on chaos and destruction.
Okay, so dialogue is crucial. But is that enough? What about all the foreign meddling?
Right.
The U.S., Russia, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they're all throwing gasoline on the fire.
They are. And that's another massive obstacle to peace. As long as Syria is a proxy battleground for these external powers, a real solution is going to be impossible.
So everyone needs to back off. Stop using Syria as their personal chessboard. But how do you make that happen?
It requires a change in mindset. A realization that pursuing their own narrow interests at the expense of Syrian lives is ultimately self-defeating. It's about finding common ground even among rivals.
Right.
To prioritize the needs of the Syrian people and the stability of the region.
So a little less fuck you and a little more we're all in this shit together. Is that even possible in international politics?
It's a long shot. But it's the only way forward. The alternative is more conflict, more instability, and the risk of the Syrian crisis spilling over into neighboring countries, creating even more chaos and suffering.
So a lose-lose situation for everyone involved.
Exactly. And that's why it's in everyone's best interest, even those who see themselves as enemies, to find a way to end this fucking war.
Okay, so we need dialogue. We need the foreign meddlers to back off. But what about the humanitarian crisis?
Yeah.
Millions displaced, the bombed-out cities, the trauma this war has caused. How do you even begin to address that?
The humanitarian crisis is a symptom of the conflict, but it's also a driver. Addressing it is crucial, not just for alleviating suffering, but also for creating the conditions for peace.
Okay.
It's about providing basic necessities. Food, water, shelter, medical care to those who've been displaced and traumatized. It's about rebuilding infrastructure, creating economic opportunities, and supporting reconciliation efforts to help heal the wounds of division.
So a massive rebuilding effort, both physical and emotional. But who's going to pay for all of this? Who's going to take charge?
The responsibility lies with the international community and the Syrian people themselves. It's a collective effort that needs financial resources, expertise, and a shared commitment to a better future. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it's the only way to break the cycle of violence and create a sustainable peace.
Man, it's overwhelming to think about the scale of the challenge, the sheer complexity of it all. War's a hell of a thing. It creates a mess that takes years, if not decades, to clean up.
You're right. And the Syrian civil war is a particularly messy conflict. But even amidst the devastation, amidst the despair, there are glimmers of hope. There are individuals and communities working to rebuild their lives and their nation, showing incredible resilience.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's still a chance, however slim, that Syria can pull itself back from the brink.
There is. And it's important to hold on to that hope, to support those working for peace, and to never give up on the possibility of a better future for Syria.
Okay, so we've laid out the battlefield. We've got Assad and his crew, backed by Iran and Russia, fighting a fragmented opposition with al-Qaeda and ISIS lurking in the shadows, and the Kurds trying to build their own thing amidst the chaos. And just to spice things up, we've got Israel keeping a watchful eye on the whole mess, ready to strike if they feel threatened.
It's a recipe for disaster, that's for sure. And the human cost of this conflict is immeasurable. Millions displaced, countless lives, lost a nation torn apart by violence and division.
It's a tragedy, no doubt about it. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. We've got more ground to cover. Next up, we're going to dive deeper into the motivations of the key players, the foreign powers pulling the strings, and the devastating impact of this war on the Syrian people. Stay tuned, because this deep dive is only getting deeper. All right, so we've talked about the players, the puppet masters, the humanitarian shit show, the whole goddamn enchilada. But the big question remains, can this whole Syrian clusterfuck ever truly end? Can they ever find peace after all this bloodshed?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer is, well, it's murkier than a goddamn swamp.
Okay.
The Syrian civil war is so tangled with regional and global power grabs that a clean break seems about as likely as a virgin in a whorehouse.
So we're looking at decades more of fighting cities turned to dust and people running for their lives. Is that the future those poor bastards are stuck with?
It's a possibility, and it's bleak as fuck. The longer this shit goes on, the harder it is to fix. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The wounds of war, they fester, and they can poison a whole goddamn society for generations.
But there's got to be some hope, right? Some way out of this hellhole. What needs to happen for Syria to finally catch a break?
It's a puzzle with 1 million pieces, and half of them are missing.
Yeah.
But a few things are key. First, everyone needs to grow the fuck up and talk. Real dialogue negotiations. Finding a political solution that addresses everyone's beefs.
So everybody needs to sit down, put their dicks away, and actually listen to each other. That sounds like a fantasy, especially with all the bad blood and backstabbing.
You're right, it's a long shot. Dialogue means compromise, giving some ground, admitting the other guy might have a point. That's tough as hell when you think the other side's the spawn of Satan.
So finding common ground in a place where everyone's ready to kill each other. That's like trying to herd cats in a hurricane.
It is. But without dialogue, without trying to find a political solution, the only option left is violence. And that's a road to nowhere. Except maybe more suffering and more extremism.
Okay, so talking's important. But what about all the meddling assholes? The U.S., Russia, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they're all stirring the pot, right?
They are, and that's a huge goddamn problem. As long as Syria is a proxy war playground for these power-hungry bastards, a real solution is impossible.
So they need to back the fuck off and stop using Syria as their personal chessboard. But how do you tell a bunch of superpowers to mind their own business?
It'd take a miracle, that's for sure. They'd have to realize that chasing their own selfish interests is actually hurting them in the long run. They need to find common ground even with their rivals and put the needs of the Syrian people first.
So less fuck you and more, let's help these poor bastards out. Noble idea, but does that shit ever happen in the real world?
It's rare. But it's the only way out of this mess. Otherwise, it's just more conflict, more instability, and the risk of this shit spreading like a virus to other countries. Nobody wins in that scenario.
Yeah, that's a shit show nobody wants to see.
Right. So even those who consider themselves enemies have a reason to work together to end this war. It's in everyone's best interest, even if their egos make it hard to swallow.
Okay, so we need to get everyone talking and get the meddling assholes to back off. But what about the humanitarian disaster? Millions displaced cities, bombed to shit, a whole generation fucked up by this war. How do you even begin to fix that?
The humanitarian crisis is a product of this war, but it's also fuel for the fire. Fixing it is key to easing the suffering and, creating the conditions for peace. It's about providing the basics: food, water, shelter, medical care to those who've lost everything. Rebuilding infrastructure, jumpstarting the economy, and helping people heal from the trauma they've endured.
So a massive reconstruction project, both physical and mental. Sounds like a job for Superman.
It'll take a superhuman effort, that's for sure. Both the international community and the Syrian people themselves need to step up. It needs money, expertise, and a shared commitment to building a better future. It won't be easy or quick, but it's the only way to break this cycle of violence and create a lasting peace.
It's a hell of a task. Wars like that, though. It breaks shit, and putting it back together takes time, sweat, and a whole lot of luck.
True. And this war's broken Syria bad. But even in the wreckage, there's hope. People are rebuilding their lives, showing incredible resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering.
So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, even if it's flickering like a dying bulb?
There is. And it's important to hold on to that hope, support those working for peace, and never give up on the possibility of a better future for Syria.
All right, that wraps up our deep dive into the Syrian civil war. It's a goddamn mess full of complexities, contradictions, tragedy, and glimmers of hope. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully you've got a better understanding of the players, their fucked up motivations, the challenges, and the long road ahead. Will Syria find peace? Who the hell knows? But understanding this shit show is the first step to figuring out how to help, or at least to avoid getting sucked into the vortex. Thanks for tuning in, you sick bastards. Stay tuned for our next deep dive into another corner of the world where shit's hitting the fan.